Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of our Kriya Yoga series. My name is Lucy, and this is our Good Events YouTube channel. And I'm really pleased to have Ryan back. Ryan, thank you very much for your time, for being with us again. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. So today, last time we finished with talking about Roy and your relationship with Roy. And I would like you to talk more about Kriya Yoga and everyday life, because when people hear about yogic meditation, they kind of imagine yogic lifestyle in, ascetic lifestyle. And is that the case with Kriya Yoga, or is there any difference, or how people can imagine the Kriya Yoga lifestyle?
Yeah, well, it's going to be different for everybody, and it really depends on where someone is in their life. For example, anyone can learn the Kriya Yoga meditation process so long as they're interested and committed to practicing every day. And also, it is required that they follow the yamas and niyamas. I know we may or may not get to that, but the yamas and niyamas are the principles of harmlessness and truthfulness and non-stealing and these things. So anyone who's sincerely interested in spiritual growth, if they want to learn how to meditate and they can follow these yogic principles, they can practice Kriya Yoga, and they can still live what most people would consider to be a normal life, visiting with family and having a career and enjoying hobbies. And that's fine. However, there are different kind of tiers or different stages of the process. And as a person gets more into their spiritual practice, they naturally may become more, I think austere might have been the word that you used. They might become a bit more, a bit more austere in the process, because in order to go into the deeper parts of spirit, or to understand or realize the deeper parts of spirit, we really have to be focused on it. And this is true for any area of life. I was at a farmer's market here in the United States. We have these gatherings of farmers who come together, and we go to the market and we get their vegetables and things. And one of my friends there, he works at that market, and he's busy all the time. He's doing his business. It's doing very, very well. And I just offhandedly asked him, well, how are you successful? And he said, well, I don't do anything else. He says, I just focus on my business. He says, you have to learn that you have to sacrifice the things that you have to sacrifice for things you want to achieve. And his business and with the way his farm works is very successful compared to anyone else in the area. And the same is true with our spiritual path. We can say we want to know God, we want to know inner peace, we want to know divinity, and our intention will pull us towards it. But we also have to pay attention to what are we doing in our lives that might be getting in the way of that. For example, maybe you have lots of friendships that are very dramatic and pull you into distractions from being able to meditate. Well, if you're a mild Kriya yogi, you can probably deal with that a little bit. But if you're very intent on your path, sometimes we have to look at our relationships and say, well, are these relationships drawing me away from my purpose? And the same thing with things like hobbies and so on. I enjoy music a lot, and I enjoy outdoor activities. But after many years of practicing, I'm involved in music and I'm involved in my hobbies a good deal less than I was early on, mainly because I am more focused on the meditation process, because I serve the role as a Kriya Yoga teacher. So I personally need to be very engaged in everything related to Kriya Yoga. I need to know how it works. I need to practice it for myself. I need to have my own direct experiences of it. And if I would live my life, say, when I was in my 20s, even though I was pretty serious then too, playing more music, being involved in more social activities and so on, I personally would not have had the same capacity of understanding that I feel that I do by directing my attention in this way. And so in my own life now, I meditate several hours a day. I study yogic texts several hours a day. I give classes on Kriya Yoga several hours a day. Everything that I do really is focused on the Kriya Yoga process, which means I don't actually have time to do all the other stuff that maybe someone who's not interested in spirituality has time to do. But that's just a difference in where someone is in their life. It's not necessarily excluding someone just because they can't spend that much time in the process. Does that answer the question?
Yes. So basically you're saying that it's not an ascetic lifestyle, but you just dedicate more time to the practice because this is your path, this is important for you. But it doesn't mean that it is kind of ascetic, or austere. It's just with your feet on the ground.
Yeah, there is a level of austerity to it because you do have to really be disciplined about your approach, even if you're just kind of doing it. But again, I always like to make the example of someone who's successful in any area of life. For example, one woman who's a Kriya Yoga student in my programs, she is a concert violinist. And so she spends 8 hours a day playing the violin, which means she doesn't have that time to do other things. Or I have a friend of mine who is very much into fitness, and that person will spend more time at the gym than most of us will spend in any other thing. So at the end of the day, I do think there is a sense of austerity and asceticism related to it, but it's directly related to what you're wanting to accomplish. If you're eating a lot of meat, if you're staying out late drinking, if you're engaged in every family drama that comes up, that's going to get in the way of your ability to process and understand higher realities. So to someone who is doing all of that, it seems like the path is very ascetic because it's requiring a focusing and narrowing down on those things which benefit you. So at the end of the day, it boils down to how do you view that idea of austerity and asceticism, and ultimately it's just about what is important to you. And just like any area of life, you're going to have to make sacrifices to support the path, and then be disciplined enough to let go of or minimize those things which get in your way. So to some people, it might seem like it is very austere.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
So now I would like to talk about your everyday life then. So how does it look like? Mm-hmm. If you can just take one of your days, and as you said, you are a Kriya Yoga teacher, so this is a slightly different level than any Kriya Yogi student doing a Kriya Yoga at home. But how do you spend your days? If you can just pick one ordinary day and tell us, what you do. And also my second question is, what do you do in your free time? Do you also go out, or are you with friends and stuff like that?
Yeah, I could also answer that to tell you what my life was like before I was officially in the role of a Kriya Yoga teacher doing this full time, just to give a little bit of insight into that. Would that be helpful?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Again, the thing we have to keep in mind is that from a very early age, I was interested in this. When I was in high school and when I was a teenager, basically all I did was play music, learn guitar, and hang out with my friends and go for hikes. that was, and go to school, of course, but that was mainly what I did. But it wasn't very long after that, when I started to get into my 20s, 20 and 21, that I became more and more engaged in Kriya Yoga. And so even though I wasn't considered a Kriya Yoga teacher then, once I discovered Kriya Yoga, I immediately changed my life. And I was just telling some of my friends last night, we'll get to that in a minute. We were talking about 21st birthday parties. And I said, well, on my 21st birthday party, I gave up smoking, drinking, meat, and staying out late. So that's what I did when I turned 21. And then in my 20s, I was a massage therapist and a craniosacral therapist. And I served in that way. I did play music for fun. I spent a lot of time outdoors. But during that time, I already had a very strong spiritual path. I was already trying to meditate 2 to 3 times a day. And I even chose to live in a way that supported that, meaning as a massage therapist, I could set my own schedule. And so throughout my 20s, I was actually only working part-time, which means I didn't have a whole lot of money really, but I had enough money that I could travel to go visit my teacher, Roy Eugene Davis, and I could have the time to meditate, and I had enough money for good food. But as far as, we didn't do a whole lot of traveling on vacations, we didn't do a whole lot of extra stuff because my focus was on that. So in those days, I'd wake up early, I'd meditate, I'd eat breakfast. If I had a garden, so I'd go do things in the garden, so we had food. And then the middle part of the day, I would see my massage therapist clients or craniosacral clients. And then in the evening, I would meditate again, and I'd usually go for a walk and then read the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, and go to bed. And I would do it very early. I'd go to bed by 9 o'clock, and I'd be getting up anywhere between 4 and 6 a.m. And that was mainly how I was living my life in my 20s and into my 30s. When I was more established as a Vedic astrologer, that business model was very more involved. So I was spending more time throughout the day teaching astrology classes, working with clients and so on, but I still maintained my morning meditation, my evening meditation, and sometimes an afternoon meditation. And I would go visit friends twice a week. I played music in a band. And so twice a week, that would be the days that I would go out and meet with people and play music and enjoy things like that. And I would always spend a lot of time in nature. I always scheduled time to go for hikes or to be out in nature at some point. And that was really the majority of my life up until around my late 30s. And it was in my late 30s that Mr. Davis encouraged me and said it would be very good for me to move into a full-time role of serving as a Kriya Yoga teacher. And that shifted not a whole lot of things. I still go to bed very early. I still get up before the sun rises. I meditate usually around 2 times a day, anywhere from between an hour to 2 hours at a time, each sitting. And then in between, I'm usually giving presentations like this, or I'm recording classes, or I'm meeting with students. I'm able to meet with students via Zoom. I try to go for a hike or biking or paddle boarding at least once a day. Today I woke up, I meditated, we went to the gym, I came home, I made breakfast, and then here we are. And the rest of my day is going to be working on books, materials, and I plan on playing music this evening because I still am in an Irish Celtic band. And so that's my free time. My free time is essentially playing music probably once or twice a week still, but it's very compact, meaning when I was a teenager, I was playing electric guitars and rock and roll, staying out way too late. And the beautiful thing about quieter music and Irish music is they only want us to play between 4 and 6. So I've got plenty of time to go home and meditate and go to sleep. So in general, that is the majority of how I live my life now. And 6 months out of the year, we do schedule usually a week-long retreat. So oftentimes we're planning that, or we're traveling for that, or we're doing that. And the schedule changes a little bit then.
Mm-hmm. And is it similar with other Kriya Yoga teachers as well? What I'm trying to ask about is it just you who's kind of living a normal life? Of course, you said previously, if you're focused on something, you give it the time.
Yeah.
So you do Kriya Yoga and you're a teacher, so you give it the time.
Mm-hmm.
And how about, for example, if you have your friends in Kriya Yoga Alliance, they are teachers too. Would you say that the Kriya teachers are more or are in touch with everyday life, or is it similar with your friends, or is it just you who's like into music and stuff?
Sure. Well, I want to be clear that, for example, you mentioned the Kriya Yoga Alliance, Ryan Strong and Shalin Tetro and Ray Booker and those people. We are friends, but we don't really spend a whole lot of time together because we live across the country. So we'll meet and we'll talk and we'll discuss things, but I would not consider us buddies. I don't know if you have a good translation for that term.
Yes, I understand what you mean.
But we deeply love each other. You know, we deeply support each other. I mean, my friends are musicians. Meaning, last night, as I was mentioning, we had a little gathering. It happens on the first, third, and fifth Sundays of every month, and those are the people I consider to be my close friends, because that's who I see all the time, and they come and help me out with the yard work sometimes, and I try to help them out with things. But we don't actually talk about Kriya Yoga or meditation. We just play music. Or one of them, she's a very good friend. She's not 80 yet, she's 79. But for example, she's helped me edit the Kriya Yoga and the Primordial Powers of Creation book, because she's a writer. So she knows about what I do because of that. But to answer your question, my experience with other Kriya Yoga teachers, at least the ones that I have met and interacted with, is that it is similar. However, most of them are a little different than me, because I don't have children, and I've never had like that family dynamic. And so many of them, you know, they do have to manage children and the family dynamic and these kinds of things, which means that this is just my guess. You know, when I'm working for myself and when I'm providing for my own resources in this way, it's easier for me to schedule the time to do what I feel I need to do, because I don't have to direct those. I don't have to worry about directing those resources elsewhere. And so the only difference between me and them is they meditate every day. They study every day. They take their practice extremely seriously. They just might be a little more involved in family dynamics than I am. That's the main difference.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Did you encounter any challenges as far as yogic lifestyle is concerned? Because you've tried to change some habits and stuff. Did you have any pitfalls or some crisis that you really, this is really tough to change this kind of habit?
Yeah. The biggest difficulty I had was actually being different than everyone else. That was the big one, because even when I was younger, even when I was not even interested in meditation, I didn't want to stay up late. I wanted to go to bed early. I wanted to get up early. I don't know why. I just did. And even when I was younger, my friends would give me all kinds of, they would just give me a hard time because they're ready to go and party and have fun. And I'm like, well, I think it's time to go to bed. So that was difficult. And then in the area that I grew up and am in now, being a vegetarian is strange. You know, not eating meat, they think you're going to die. They don't understand. And so the hard part for me was really maintaining that consistent, every time having to tell people once again, yes, I'm a vegetarian. And also, I was always deeply interested in contemplation. And so to try to explain to people, oh, I would rather go sit in my meditation chair back there and not talk to someone for 2 hours than I would to go have a discussion about things that I'm not really interested in. So ultimately, my biggest challenge was maintaining, or I don't even know how to describe it, but keeping steady. I wanted to keep steady, so nothing was really taking me off, but sometimes it was extremely frustrating to having to tell people again and again, look, I love you, I just don't want to stay out late, or I love you, I just don't want to eat the meat that you've made. Like trying to keep that process of letting people know it's not that I'm not trying to cause problems here, but these are my choices, and I would like to maintain those choices. As far as meditation, I was always good at getting into the process, and we've talked about this on our own at other times. What I found was that helped out a whole lot was by not trying to think that religion or spirituality is going to cure your anxiety, your depression, your other issues that you might have to deal with. When people think that is what spirituality is going to do, sometimes it works, but in my experience, most of the time, it just leaves people feeling like spirituality isn't really worth it at all, because they try it for several years and they still feel that sense of anxiety, or they still feel that inner sense of difficulty. And they might be more peaceful and more detached and able to handle it, but it hasn't really resolved the issue. So for me, one of the things that I had to look into, which helped out a lot, was talking to a counselor, a therapist, to say, look, I've been doing this stuff for this long. Yes, I'm much more disciplined. Yes, I'm much more optimistic. Yes, I'm much more focused, and I do have more inner peace. But these things still keep coming into my life. These patterns still keep coming into my life. And by working with someone who's skillful in that, it resolved a lot of these underlying tensions. And then the meditation process, the spiritual process, kind of bloomed. It was as if, when you read Autobiography of a Yogi and you hear these experiences that Yogananda describes, and you want to experience that. Well, sometimes the thing that gets in the way of that is that we have some unresolved psychological things that we're unaware of. We don't know how to address them. And when you address them, it's like all of this energy becomes free, all of this space becomes free. So then when you sit down to do a practice like chanting through the chakras or Kriya pranayama, you feel like, yes, this worked exactly how it was intended to work. So I think that was, it wasn't really a struggle because I did go to college for psychology and philosophy, so I understood it. But it was when I actually really took it seriously, when I really looked at it and decided to apply that to my process, that a lot of the material, the spiritual material, took on a really powerful energy in my life and really opened up many different doors.
I think it was actually Yogananda who said that the whole spiritual path is 90% psychological battle.
Yes.
And then the rest practice and stuff, but first introspection really, and living it.
Right.
And so that's why I find this topic really important, Kriya Yoga and in general, spirituality in everyday life, because that was my pitfall in the past. And thanks to my dear teacher who tried to beat the hell out of me so that I'm not flying somewhere in the sky, but really with my feet on the ground. Yeah. I probably wouldn't be sitting here with you being sane, because last time you said that it is very important to deal with ourselves first. Yeah. So I have to sign that completely with my whole heart, because then confusion comes, and this instability, or is it correct in English?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And things like that. So it's really important. And I bet you meet many students. Not sure about your Kriya apprenticeship program, how deep you can really get to know the people.
Right.
But do you see that also? Do the people struggle, or what would you say is in general very challenging for people on their path once they get initiated into Kriya Yoga, and there is this big vow, to this is my promise. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a few things, and with the apprenticeship program, you mentioned that that's a 2-year program, and so throughout that program, people can go on retreat. We do go on retreats together, but I do offer like regular Zoom meetings for people who are going through that program. So I am able to meet with people and get a sense of them. But most of the time, I'm pretty consistent in my delivery and in my expectations. And what I find is if someone's going through the 2-year program, which is why I arranged it this way, if you can sit there and listen to me talk about the same thing over and over for 2 years, then I know you probably have a pretty good handle on what it takes to be successful on the spiritual path. And like you said, some people come to the spiritual path because they're looking for bliss. They're looking for this kind of escape to float away, right? And that's not really what the path is about. The path is about engaging yourself, about improving your understanding and deepening your discernment about what is real of you. You are spirit working through a body, and the body is temporary. All of our bodies are going to be born, they're going to die. And so the whole purpose of our process is to recognize what is this essence that is coming through. And so what a lot of people struggle with is, number one, the consistency. Being able to get up every day and do the same thing over and over again, whether it works out to where you're feeling fantastic or whether you just went through an exercise routine of your meditation techniques. However, just like anything else, I find this to be true in any area of life. For example, people have fantasies. They have fantasies about the spiritual path. They also have fantasies about relationships. I'm just using the relationships as an example. People think, oh, I'm going to find my soulmate. As soon as I find my soulmate, it's all going to work out perfectly. And that's fantasy. And that's why so many people don't have good relationships, because they're looking for something that doesn't exist. However, if a person knows, I want to have a good, loving, wholesome relationship, well, I'm willing to meet someone who's not perfect, who can see that I'm not perfect, and that we can learn and grow together and build a life, that we can support each other. And as the decades go by, then real love is there, then real trust is there, then real support is there. And then you know what it means to be in a loving relationship. Well, the same thing is true with the spiritual path. You are cultivating a relationship with spirit. And it's not always going to be easy, because if a person came to the spiritual path and who they are right now coming to the spiritual path, if they stayed that way the whole time, they're not making any changes. They're not making any progress. In order to realize spirit, you have to change in such a way that supports that realization. You have to learn to be harmless, truthful. You have to learn to be devoted to a higher power. You have to figure out, how can that be real to you? And that's a challenging thing. And Mr. Davis, my Kriya Yoga teacher, talked about this too. He said, one of the biggest obstacles to success on the spiritual path is when a person doesn't change in the way they need to be successful. And again, using the example of relationships, if you're going to be selfish and petty and mean to someone, you're never going to have a successful relationship. So that person has to learn how to be selfless, how to be kind, how to be loving. And with the spiritual path, it's the same thing. If you are trying to always satisfy your desires, if it's all about you, if what you want from your spiritual path is just to have a glorified human experience of who you are, well, that doesn't work. No one has ever been able to do that and experienced a state of enlightenment or clarity. So you have to learn what are the principles of yoga, of meditation, of your spiritual path, and then you have to find a way to change yourself. There's a TV show that I used to like to watch. It was called that 70s show. And I thought it was funny because it reminded me a lot of being a kid. But one time, one of the characters said to another character who was having a lot of problems in life, she said, "There's nothing wrong with you that changing yourself completely can't fix." Now, we don't have to go that far to where we completely ignore our own unique individual expression. My unique individual expression, I love music. I really enjoy researching things deeply. I have certain things that have been true for me my entire life, but there were certain things I couldn't be anymore. When I was a teenager, I was kind of a sarcastic, bitter person. Well, you can't be a sarcastic, bitter person and realize the depth of spirit. So you have to figure out, well, why are you sarcastic? Why are you bitter? Why do you have anger? And then you have to resolve that. And in that resolution, you gain more light and more clarity to see, oh, well, spirit is naturally kind and loving. And for example, we talked about truthfulness before we started this call. Truthfulness is at least in my experience, the most important quality on this whole path. And it's not truthfulness in the sense of someone says, oh, does this dress make me look fat? And you don't say, well, yes, it does. It's not that kind of truthfulness. That's mean. But it means having integrity. It means knowing what is true for you. And if you don't know what's true for you, you admit that, and then you try to figure it out. Because a lot of people come to the path where they are confused. They don't know what truth is. They don't know how to trust their gut. They don't know how to trust their intuition. And that's why so many people get caught up in bad relationships with spiritual teachers who are just misleading them or are confused themselves. And this goes back to the idea of psychological well-being. When you are psychologically strong and healthy, you know when someone's trying to manipulate you. when you are psychologically strong and healthy, you know what love feels like, what support feels like. You know how to set firm boundaries. You know how to say no, and you know how to spot difficulties. So psychological health helps with that. But the more you try to engage in truth, to just try to understand what it is, even though it's a struggle and it can be hard for many years, in the process of learning what your truth is. For example, for me, telling my family for 10 years, I am a vegetarian, rather than saying like, all right, fine, I'll eat your hamburgers. You maintain that level of truthfulness. Or if you are deeply interested in calm and peace, and you're with someone who's always dramatic and always pulling you into a dramatic situation, your truth is you say, no, I can't keep engaging that with you because that's not what's of interest to me. It's not to be mean. It's not to belittle the person who has other ideas about what is useful to them, but it's about learning for yourself what is absolutely important. I'll say one more quick thing, and then we'll turn it back to your questions. As a Vedic astrologer, I don't really like Vedic astrology because sometimes it's very superstitious and causes a lot of confusion. But I do like Vedic astrology because it holds a deep sense of effective philosophy. Like each of the planets represents an aspect of yourself. So Mars is the soldier. Now, oftentimes we think of soldiers as mean people who just want to like kill everybody. Well, a true soldier only defends. A true soldier only fights for what is right. So they're not looking for fights, but they'll actually get up and fight if some injustice is happening. That's Mars. So that's a good Mars. Saturn is a planet which deals with austerity, but he's a planet that also deals with truth. And sometimes the truth is hard to admit for ourselves and for others. But there's a story of a person in India who was going through a difficult planetary cycle where Saturn was involved. And whenever Saturn comes around, a person usually feels like they're just losing all the good stuff in their life. And so Saturn came to this person, metaphorically, of course, and said, I'm about to influence your life. And as the person laid there in bed, all these virtues started leaving them. All of the virtues started kind of going off into space. And the last virtue that came out of the person's heart was truth. And the person reached up and grabbed that virtue and said, look, the rest of them can leave, but you have to stay with me. And the truth said, okay. And so the truth went back into the person's heart. And then all the other virtues said, oh, well, we can't go anywhere without truth. And so since the person held on to truth, every other virtue came back into that person's life. And on the Kriya Yoga path, on any authentic spiritual path, doing one's best to seek the truth, understand the truth, live the truth, embody the truth with kindness and with wisdom. If you just did that and you didn't do anything else, you would probably be quite a bit more enlightened than most of the meditators out there.
Yeah, thank you. It was a beautiful answer. And so also talking back to the Kriya Yoga lineage, because the old masters, they were also pretty much into everyday life.
Yeah.
So the first great yogi that brought back or reinvented Kriya Yoga for the new world in the 19th century was Lahiri Mahasaya. And he was taught by Mahavatar Babaji.
Yes.
And it's very interesting, actually. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, that he was first initiated into Kriya Yoga in Himalayas, where he accidentally, he had some work to do. He went on a business trip, kind of. Yeah. And then when he returned after all the weeks with Babaji, not wanting to come back to the world, he got married because that's also was asked of him, and he got children. So can you please elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So first of all, I'm not sure if he was, I believe he was married first. I believe he was married first, and then he met Babaji. I could be wrong on that, but I do know that he ended up having like 5 children after he met Babaji. So there was clearly a change there. So I'm not clear on that specific, but the reason it worked out the way it did was because up until that point, the knowledge of Kriya Yoga and the knowledge of understanding that deeper aspect of ourselves, it was reserved for renunciate yogis who gave up the world, who said, in a sense, I've had enough and I'm going to go study these things. I'm not going to be attached to worldly things. And we could go into why that was the case. I'll mention it briefly, just for completion's sake. But during the time before Lahiri Mahasaya was bringing Kriya Yoga back into our consciousness, that was what we consider to be the Dark Ages, the Kali Yuga. And during the Kali Yuga, it's extremely hard for the majority of people to understand subtler and finer things like authentic spiritual practice. So it's protected by renunciates and so on, renunciate yogis. But around the time that Lahiri Mahasaya had met Mahavatar Babaji, that was when we were shifting out of the Dark Ages into what's called the Dwapara Yuga, or the Electric Age. And that's when it becomes, spiritual practices can become more accessible to the masses, meaning more people can grasp it. And we've seen how that has happened since 1863 or 1865 in that time. Whereas before, what we were experiencing in religion was really just religion. It was probably usually a very dogmatic approach to traditions and churches and these kinds of things. But over the last 150 years or so, yoga, meditation, all kinds of different forms of religion have become more acceptable and widely known and widely understood. So there has been this change, this shift in consciousness, or a shift in the field of consciousness. And so the purpose of Lahiri Mahasaya was to show that a person can live in this world with a family, providing for the resources because he worked as a clerk, and they can still fulfill their spiritual destiny of learning how to meditate, of learning how to understand deeper spiritual philosophies. And that was really the important shift in perspective. And it was from that point forward that normal people, normal everyday people, then have the opportunity to meditate once or twice a day, but they could still spend time with their family. They could study the Gita, the Yoga Sutras, or whatever scripture is important to them, and they could benefit from that, but they could still live a relatively normal life, right? And ultimately, the whole purpose is that as we progress through these ages, so for example, after this age comes the Silver Age, a few thousand years away, but then eventually there's an Enlightened Age. And the general idea is that as we evolve and grow as a human field of consciousness, then society itself eventually begins to reflect these spiritual values. Whereas only a certain small group of people do over here, well, in time, thousands of years from now, society is actually run not by greed, not by capitalism, not by fear. It's actually run by people who want to support you to be successful in this life, to experience love, and to feel safe, while also encouraging you to recognize that there is a whole other, that spirit permeates it all. And so it's really part of a progression. And even now, we went from Lahiri Mahasaya to Sri Yukteswar and Yogananda. Well, Yogananda, he was one of the first people to teach Kriya Yoga on a mass scale. That was a no-no. Before it was, yes, you can be a householder, you can have a family, but you're learning directly from your teacher, student. It wasn't, I'm going to go teach this to 3,000 people. But as Yogananda had said, and even my teacher, Mr. Davis, it was Yogananda's mission and purpose, even though only a few of the people he worked with actually understood what he was saying. But by being there, by sharing it, by talking about it widely and broadly, it allowed the greater consciousness to begin to think, oh, maybe meditation is something. Maybe I need to look a little bit more into yoga. And so even now, many of the people I know here where I live, even though they don't care about vegetarianism or deeper spirituality, almost all of them have gone to a yoga class. And so it has reached more people. And in time, that becomes deeper and clearer and more meaningful. So whereas now we have people who don't really care about spirituality practicing yoga, well, eventually, a few generations down the road, they'll be practicing yoga and they'll be slightly a little more interested in spirituality, and it will continue to grow from there. So there's this whole, I don't want to say a cosmic process, but there is an intelligent process going on. And the stages of the Kriya Yoga teachers, as you mentioned, they reflect that. They reflect where humanity is and what needs to be introduced to humanity at this time.
So, in other words, when actually Babaji wanted him to step back into everyday life, that was the purpose. Otherwise, he would just be another yogi in a cave, because that was his desire. He didn't want to go back. He wanted to stay with his master.
Right.
And wander about the Himalayas with a group of others and just be in the pristine, nice energy. But
Right.
he was sent back, and without him being in everyday life, Kriya Yoga wouldn't have spread. So
Yes.
particularly, sometimes that's probably also the reason to spread the wave, so to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm in no way, please don't mistake me, I'm in no way comparing myself to Lahiri Mahashaya here. But for example, in my own life, even though I began practicing Kriya Yoga meditation when I was 20 years old, I was initiated when I was 21. I was authorized to teach 5 years later. I was very young. I wasn't even, I think I just turned 25 after I'd been authorized to teach. But through that whole process, I wanted to just teach Kriya Yoga because that's what I felt was the most important thing. But my teacher kept telling me, no, you have to provide for your resources in just like everyone else does. And what he was encouraging me to do was to integrate being able to be active in the world while still attending to my spiritual practice. Because if I had just stopped working, if I had just become a wandering swami, well, I would not have learned the lessons that I needed to learn in order to actually make it real for me. I just would have been caught up in that persona of a spiritual teacher. Whereas for me, as I reflect upon it, by having to stay in the world, engage the world, manage a business so that I can have a home and pay for my food and these kinds of things, that changed my capacity to understand what spirituality was really about. It changed my capacity from I need to escape from the world to you can be integrated into the world while still working out your inner spiritual your inner spiritual process. So again, I'm not comparing myself to Lahiri Mahasaya, and I'm not comparing Roy to Babaji, but we can see between teachers and students, usually the teacher is able to share with the student what they need to do for themselves, but also what they need to do for others. So that you can be a role model, or so that you can be something that people can look to and say, oh, this person is still very spiritual, still able to focus on their spiritual practice, but you know what? They go out with their friends and play music, or they've dealt with lots of struggle in their life and they still do it. So that is a very common theme and thread, throughout the tradition from teacher to student.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I think you very nicely concluded the whole topic of everyday life.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to our next session, next episode, if you have time still. And then we can start really talking about the basics of Kriya Yoga and Patanjali Yoga Sutras and things like that. So Ryan, it was really nice seeing you today again. Thank you for having time for us, for me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me, and it was good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
You too.